My name is Mallory Winters, and I've spent the last decade of my life walking on eggshells in my own home. Today, those eggshells are about to shatter. Mallory, your father's legacy doesn't belong to you alone. Alara's voice dripped with entitlement, her eyes daring me to defy her. My mother-in-law stood in the doorway of my kitchen, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on the doorframe. I gripped the edge of the counter, willing myself to stay calm. Alara, we've been through this. My father's estate is not up for discussion. Don't be selfish, dear, she cooed, her saccharine tone barely masking her irritation. Gideon is your husband. What's yours is his, and what's his is mine. The absurdity of her statement almost made me laugh. Almost. That's not how it works, and you know it. Mallory. Gideon's voice called from the living room. Is everything okay? I closed my eyes, silently praying for strength. Everything's fine, honey. Your mother and I are just chatting. Alara's lips curled into a triumphant smirk. Yes, Gideon, darling. We're having a lovely conversation about family loyalty. I bit my tongue, tasting blood. Family loyalty. As if Alara knew the meaning of the word. Look, I said, keeping my voice low, I understand you're concerned about Gideon's business. But my father's money was never meant to be a crutch for this family. Alara's eyes narrowed. Your father supported this household for years. Are you saying you're too good for his help now? No, I'm saying dash. The shrill ring of my cell phone cut through the tension. I glanced at the caller ID. Dad's lawyer. I need to take this, I said, brushing past Alara. Her hand shot out, gripping my arm. This conversation isn't over, Mallory. I yanked my arm free, my patience finally snapping. Yes, it is. Stepping onto the back porch, I answered the call. Hello. Mrs. Winters? This is Charles Blackwood, your father's attorney. I'm calling about Raymond's will. My heart clenched. It had been 3 months since Dad's passing, and the wound still felt fresh. Yes, Mr. Blackwood. What can I do for you? There's been a development. Your father left some unexpected instructions. I think it's best if we meet in person to discuss the details. I frowned, confusion and curiosity warring within me. Of course. When? Tomorrow afternoon, if possible. My office, 2 p.m. I'll be there. I promised, my mind racing. As I ended the call, I turned to find Gideon standing in the doorway, his brow furrowed with concern. Everything okay, Mal? You look pale. I forced a smile, guilt gnawing at me for the relief I felt at his presence. Just some stuff about Dad's will. Nothing to worry about. He nodded, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to push. Mom's asking about dinner plans. Should I tell her we're eating out? The thought of spending an entire meal with Alara made my stomach churn. Actually, I'm not feeling great. Why don't you two go ahead without me? Gideon's face fell, and I hated myself a little for the lie. But I needed space, time to think. If you're sure, he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Feel better, okay? As he turned to leave, I caught a whiff of unfamiliar perfume on his collar. My heart sank, another piece of my world threatening to crumble. I watched him go, the weight of unspoken words and mounting secrets pressing down on me. Tomorrow's meeting with the lawyer loomed large in my mind, a beacon of what? Hope? Change? One thing was certain. Something had to give. And soon. The law office of Blackwood and Associates felt cold and impersonal, much like the news I was about to receive. I smoothed my skirt, trying to quell the nervous energy coursing through me. Mrs. Winters. Charles Blackwood greeted me, his tone somber. Please have a seat. I perched on the edge of the leather chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Mr. Blackwood, what's this about? Has something changed with my father's will? He cleared his throat, shuffling papers on his desk. Your father, Raymond, was a complex man, Mrs. Winters. He had unconventional ideas about legacy. My heart raced. What do you mean? Your father has left you a substantial inheritance, he said, sliding a document across the desk, including a sum of $5 million and the deed to his historic family home on Maple Street. I stared at the paper, my vision blurring. $5 million? The house? But why? Blackwood's eyes softened. Raymond was proud of you, Mallory. He wanted to ensure your independence and happiness. A lump formed in my throat. Dad had always been my silent supporter. But this was beyond anything I'd imagined. There's more, Blackwood continued. The inheritance comes with a condition. The money and property are to be used at your sole discretion. No one else can make decisions regarding these assets. The implication hit me like a tidal wave. Dad had known. He'd seen the dynamics in my marriage, the constant pressure from Alara. This was his way of giving me an out. Thank you, I managed to whisper, gathering the papers with trembling hands. As I left the office, my phone buzzed incessantly. Alara. Of course. I answered, bracing myself. Hello. Well, Alara's voice crackled through the speaker. What did the lawyer say? How much did Raymond leave us? The old me would have stumbled, made excuses. But something had shifted. There is no us in this situation, Alara. The inheritance is mine. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. You know Gideon's business needs capital. This is our chance to dash. No. I cut her off, surprising myself with my firmness. This is my father's legacy, and I'll honor it as I see fit. You ungrateful little dash. I ended the call, a strange mix of terror and exhilaration flooding my veins. When I arrived home, Gideon was waiting, his face a mask of concern. Mal, what's going on? Mom's on the warpath. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. We need to talk, Gideon. About the inheritance, about us, about everything. His brow furrowed. What do you mean? Your mother wants to use my father's money for your business, I said, watching his reaction carefully. Is that what you want too? Gideon's eyes darted away, guilt written across his features. Mal, you know how tight things have been. This could be our chance to turn everything around. Our chance? I echoed, the words tasting bitter. Or your mother's chance to sink her claws deeper into our lives? That's not fair, he protested weakly. Isn't it? I countered, years of pent-up frustration bubbling to the surface. When was the last time you made a decision without consulting her? When was the last time you stood up for me? Gideon's face crumpled. I don't know what you want from me, Mal. I want a partner, I said, my voice breaking. Not someone who lets his mother dictate our lives. A heavy silence fell between us, filled with unspoken truths and shattered illusions. What are you going to do? Gideon finally asked, his voice small. I squared my shoulders, feeling a newfound strength coursing through me. I'm going to honor my father's wishes. I'm going to use this inheritance to build something meaningful. And I'm going to do it on my own terms. As the words left my mouth, I realized this wasn't just about the money or the house. This was my breaking point, the moment I chose myself over the suffocating expectations that had defined my life for so long. Gideon's face fell, realization dawning in his eyes. Mal, please. We can work this out. But I was already moving, gathering my keys and jacket. I need some time, Gideon. To think, to breathe. As I walked out the door, I felt the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like my own. The days following my confrontation with Gideon blurred together in a haze of tense silences and avoided glances. Our home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield where every word was a potential landmine. One morning, I found Gideon hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, dark circles under his eyes. Another late night? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He barely looked up. Mom's been helping me strategize for the business. We think we've found a way to turn things around. The casual mention of Alara sent a familiar surge of frustration through me. And what does the strategy involve? Gideon hesitated, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. Well, we were thinking, maybe we could use some of your inheritance as an investment. Just temporarily, of course. I felt the blood drain from my face. You discuss my inheritance with your mother? Mal, it's not like that. He backpedaled, finally meeting my gaze. We're family. We should be supporting each other. Family? I echoed, my voice rising. Is that what you call it when your mother constantly undermines me? When you can't make a single decision without her approval? Gideon's face hardened. That's not fair. Mom only wants what's best for us. For us, or for her? I shot back. The argument escalated, years of pent-up resentment spilling out. Gideon's voice grew louder, more defensive with each exchange. I barely recognized the man before me, so far removed from the person I'd fallen in love with. Maybe Mom's right, he finally snapped. Maybe you're just being selfish. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and irretrievable. In that moment, I saw with painful clarity the extent of Alara's influence, how deeply it had poisoned our relationship. I need some air, I muttered, grabbing my keys and jacket. I drove aimlessly, tears blurring my vision, until I found myself outside my father's old house, now my house. The Grand Victorian stood silent and imposing, a testament to a legacy I was only beginning to understand. As I approached the front door, a voice called out from next door. Well, if it isn't Raymond's girl. I turned to see an elderly woman waving from her porch, a knowing smile on her weathered face. Mrs. Beatrice? I asked, recognizing my father's longtime neighbor. The one and only, she chuckled. Come on over, dear. You look like you could use a cup of tea and a friendly ear. Grateful for the distraction, I joined Mrs. Beatrice on her porch. As she poured tea into delicate china cups, she regaled me with stories of my father, his kindness, his quiet strength, his dreams for the community. You know, she said, her eyes twinkling, Raymond always said that house was meant for more than just one family. He had big plans for it. I leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of plans? Mrs. Beatrice smiled. He talked about turning it into a place where people could come together, where the elderly in our community could find companionship and purpose. Your father had a big heart, Mallory. He saw potential where others saw problems. As she spoke, something stirred within me, a spark of inspiration, a glimmer of possibility. I thought about the inheritance, about my father's legacy, about the suffocating life I'd been living. Mrs. Beatrice, I said slowly, an idea taking shape. What would you think about helping me bring my father's vision to life? The old woman's face lit up. Oh, honey, I thought you'd never ask. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the porch, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I knew what I had to do. Driving home, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead. Gideon was waiting, his face a mixture of guilt and apprehension. Mal, I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't mean dash. I held up a hand, cutting him off. Gideon, I've made a decision. I'm moving into my father's house. I need space. Time to figure things out. His face fell, but I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. And us. I took a deep breath. That depends on you. On whether you're ready to stand with me, or if you'll always stand with your mother. As I packed my bags, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving in the right direction, towards a future that was truly my own. The old Victorian creaked and groaned as I moved through its empty rooms, my footsteps echoing off bare walls. It had been a week since I'd left Gideon, and the house still felt more like a stranger than a home. But with each passing day, I could feel my father's presence growing stronger, guiding me towards something greater. I stood in what used to be the parlor, envisioning the possibilities. This could be a reading room, I murmured to myself, running my hand along the dusty mantelpiece. Talking to ghosts already? A familiar voice chuckled from the doorway. I spun around, startled. Mrs. Beatrice. I didn't hear you come in. The elderly woman shuffled into the room, her eyes twinkling with mischief. These old bones still have a few tricks up their sleeve. Now, tell me about these grand plans of yours. As we walked through the house, I shared my vision for the community center, a place where the elderly could gather, learn, and find purpose. Mrs. Beatrice listened intently, offering suggestions and sharing anecdotes about the neighborhood's needs. You know, she said, pausing by a large bay window, There's a group of us who've been meeting at the library for years. Book club, knitting circle, that sort of thing. But we've been running out of space. This could be perfect. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and for the first time since moving in, I felt a surge of excitement. Mrs. Beatrice, would you help me get the word out? I want to invite the community to be part of this from the ground up. She patted my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Oh, honey, just you wait. We'll have this place bustling in no time. As Mrs. Beatrice left, promising to spread the word, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about escaping Alara's influence or finding my own path. It was about honoring my father's legacy and making a real difference. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I met with contractors, researched zoning laws, and started drafting a business plan. Each step forward felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of the strength I'd lost over years of compromise. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old boxes in the attic, I came across a familiar face in a dusty photograph. Emmett, my childhood best friend, grinning beside me at some long-forgotten summer barbecue. I hadn't thought about him in years, but seeing his face brought back a flood of memories, of laughter, of understanding, of a connection untainted by manipulation or expectation. On impulse, I searched for him online, surprised to find he was living just a few towns over. Before I could talk myself out of it, I sent him a message, explaining my situation and inviting him to see the house. To my shock, he replied almost immediately. Mal, it's been too long. I'd love to catch up and see what you're up to. How's tomorrow? As I confirmed the plans, a mix of nervousness and anticipation bubbled in my chest. It felt like a lifeline to a simpler time, a reminder of who I used to be before Alara's influence had worn me down. The next day, as I waited for Emmett to arrive, my phone buzzed with a text from Gideon. We need to talk. Mom's been asking questions about the inheritance. Please call me. I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar weight of obligations settling over me. But before I could respond, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Emmett standing there, his smile just as warm and genuine as I remembered. Mal, he said, pulling me into a hug. It's so good to see you. As we embraced, I felt something shift inside me, a piece of the old Mallory, the one who stood up for herself and pursued her dreams, clicking back into place. Come on in, I said, leading him inside. I have so much to tell you. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, truly heard. And as Emmett and I walked through the house, sharing ideas and laughing at old memories, I realized that this project wasn't just about creating a community center. It was about rebuilding myself, one room at a time. The community center project was gaining momentum, breathing new life into the old Victorian and into me. Each day brought new challenges and triumphs, from securing permits to organizing volunteer groups. Emmett had become a constant presence, his unwavering support and easy laughter a balm to my frayed nerves. One afternoon, as we were painting what would soon be the center's library, Emmett paused, his brush hovering mid-stroke. Mal, you're different, he said, his eyes searching my face. Happier, more. You. I felt a warmth spread through my chest at his words. I feel more like myself than I have in years, I admitted, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. Our moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of my phone. Gideon's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach twisted with a mix of concern and apprehension. I should take this, I said, stepping out onto the porch. Mal. Gideon's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding strained. I need to talk to you. In person. It's important. Despite my reservations, I agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. As I hung up, I caught Emmett watching me, his expression unreadable. Everything okay? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. I nodded, forcing a smile. Just unfinished business. I won't be long. The cafe was bustling when I arrived, but Gideon was easy to spot, hunched over a table in the corner. As I approached, I was struck by how haggard he looked, his usual polished appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and dark circles under his eyes. Mal, he said, relief evident in his voice. Thank you for coming. I slid into the seat across from him. keeping my tone even. "What's going on, Gideon?" He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his eyes darting nervously. "It's the business. Everything's fallen apart. The investors pulled out, and the bank's calling in our loans. I don't know what to do." A familiar pang of sympathy tugged at my heart, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of anger. "And let me guess, your mother suggested you come to me for help?" Gideon's flinch was all the confirmation I needed. "She means well, Mal. She's just trying to protect our future." "Our future?" I echoed, incredulity coloring my voice. "Gideon, we've been living separate lives for months. You chose your mother over me at every turn. And now that things have gone south, you expect me to bail you out?" His face crumpled, a mix of shame and desperation. "I know I've made mistakes, but Mal, we built this life together. Doesn't that count for something?" For a moment, I was tempted. The old Mallory, the one who bent over backwards to keep the peace, whispered that I should help him. But as I looked at Gideon, really looked at him, I saw the years of compromise, of putting my own dreams on hold for his ambitions and his mother's machinations. "I'm sorry, Gideon," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But I can't be your safety net anymore. I have my own life to build now." His expression hardened, a flash of his mother's manipulative nature shining through. "So that's it? You're just going to abandon me? After everything we've been through?" I stood, gathering my resolve. "I'm not abandoning you, Gideon. I'm choosing myself. Maybe it's time you did the same." As I walked away, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. It was a bittersweet victory, tinged with the ache of what could have been. But with each step, I felt stronger, more certain of my path. When I returned to the Victorian, Emmett was waiting on the porch, concern etched on his face. "How'd it go?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath, feeling the last vestiges of my old life falling away. "It went exactly as it needed to," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Emmett nodded, understanding in his eyes. "What do you need?" I looked at the half-painted walls, the piles of donated books waiting to be shelved, the plans for a garden that would bring color and life to the community. "I need to finish what I started," I said, a newfound determination coursing through me. As we walked back into the house, I felt a shift, not just in my relationship with Gideon, but in my relationship with myself. For the first time in years, I was standing on my own 2 feet, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The community center was no longer just a project. It was a testament to my resilience, a symbol of the woman I was becoming. And as I picked up my paintbrush, I knew that this was only the beginning. The grand opening of the community center was just days away, and the old Victorian buzzed with activity. Volunteers scurried about, hanging curtains and arranging furniture, while Mrs. Beatrice directed operations like a seasoned general. I stood in the midst of it all, a surge of pride warming my chest. "Mallory, dear," Mrs. Beatrice called, waving me over. "The local paper wants to do a feature on the center. Isn't that wonderful?" I nodded, excitement mingling with a twinge of apprehension. Publicity meant exposure, and exposure meant my phone buzzed, as if on cue. An unknown number. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Is this Mallory Winters?" a gruff voice asked. "I'm calling from the city planning office. We've received some concerning reports about your property." My stomach dropped. Concerning reports? What kind of reports? Zoning violations, safety hazards. "We'll need to conduct an immediate inspection before you can open to the public." As the caller rattled off a list of alleged infractions, my mind raced. None of this made sense. We'd meticulously followed every regulation, obtained every permit. "Unless—" "I understand," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "When can we expect the inspector?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp." I hung up, my hands shaking. This had Alara written all over it. "Mal." Emmett's concerned voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "What's wrong?" I filled him in, watching his expression darken. "That manipulative witch," he muttered. "She won't stop until she's destroyed everything you've built." "Not everything," I said, a steely resolve settling over me. Not this time. We spent the night in a frenzy of preparation, double-checking every document, every safety measure. As dawn broke, I stood on the porch, watching a sleek black car pull up. A tall man in a crisp suit emerged, his face a mask of professional detachment. "Mrs. Winters? I'm here for the inspection." I led him through the house, answering his questions with calm precision. But as we reached the second floor, a commotion erupted from outside. "You can't do this." Alara's shrill voice carried through the open window. "That house belongs to my son." My heart raced as I hurried downstairs, the inspector close behind. Outside, Alara stood toe-to-toe with Mrs. Beatrice, a small crowd of neighbors gathering to watch. "Your son?" Mrs. Beatrice scoffed. "Honey, this house belongs to Mallory, and she's doing more good with it than your family ever did." Alara's face contorted with rage. "You don't know anything. This community center is a sham. It's unsafe, it's illegal, and I won't stand by while dash." "While what, Alara?" I interrupted, stepping onto the porch. "While I use my inheritance the way my father intended. While I build something that actually helps people." She whirled on me, eyes flashing. "You ungrateful little dash." "That's enough." The inspector's authoritative voice cut through the tension. He turned to me, his expression softening slightly. "Mrs. Winters, I've seen enough. Your center not only meets but exceeds all safety and zoning requirements. You're clear to open as scheduled." A cheer went up from the gathered neighbors. Alara's face drained of color as she realized her plan had backfired spectacularly. "You haven't heard the last of this," she hissed, but her words lacked their usual venom. As she stormed off, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Emmett stood beside me, a mixture of pride and concern in his eyes. "You okay?" I took a deep breath, surveying the scene before me. Mrs. Beatrice was regaling the neighbors with a blow-by-blow account of her confrontation with Alara. The inspector was chatting amiably with a group of volunteers. And through the open door, I could see the center, my father's legacy, my own dream, ready to welcome its first visitors. "You know what?" I said, a smile spreading across my face. "I'm better than okay. I'm free." As the crowd dispersed and we headed back inside to finish preparations, I felt a shift in the air. Alara's desperate attempt to sabotage the center had only strengthened my resolve and united the community behind me. The grand opening was no longer just a celebration of the center. It was a declaration of independence, a testament to the power of choosing oneself. And as I looked at Emmett, at Mrs. Beatrice, at all the people who had rallied around this project, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I wouldn't face them alone. The reckoning had come, and I had emerged stronger for it. Now it was time to build the future, on my terms. The grand opening of the community center was a resounding success. Laughter and chatter filled the once empty rooms, elderly residents exploring their new haven with gleaming eyes. As I watched Mrs. Beatrice lead a lively tour group, pride swelled in my chest. This was everything my father had dreamed of, everything I had fought for. "Mallory." A familiar voice cut through the joyous din. I turned to see Gideon standing in the doorway, looking lost and out of place. "Gideon," I said, surprise coloring my tone. "I didn't expect to see you here." He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room. "Can we talk? Privately?" Nodding, I led him to the small office I'd set up in the back of the house. As I closed the door behind us, the muffled sounds of the celebration faded away, leaving a heavy silence. "What is it, Gideon?" I asked, crossing my arms. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I've left my mother's house. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about the choices I've made." My heart quickened, a mix of hope and wariness coursing through me. And I realize now how wrong I've been," he said, his voice cracking. "How I let my mother control me, control us."
"I'm so sorry, Mal."
"For everything." Before I could respond, the door burst open. Alara stormed in, her face contorted with rage. "There you are," she spat at Gideon. How dare you abandon me like this? After everything I've done for you? Gideon flinched, but stood his ground. Mother, please. This has to stop. You can't keep manipulating us like this. Alara's eyes narrowed, her gaze shifting between Gideon and me. Us? There is no us anymore. She left you, remember? She chose this ridiculous project over her own family. No, Mother, Gideon said, his voice growing stronger. You drove her away. You've been driving everyone away for years with your schemes and your control. I watched in stunned silence as Gideon, for the first time in our marriage, stood up to his mother. Alara's face paled, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. How can you say that? She whispered, her voice trembling. Everything I've done for you. No, Gideon countered, shaking his head. You did it for yourself. To keep me dependent on you, to keep Mallory under your thumb. But it ends now. Alara's eyes flashed dangerously. You ungrateful child. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing but fear and insecurity, Gideon shot back. Mallory showed me what real love and support look like. She built this place, helped all these people, while you were busy tearing everything down. As mother and son faced off, years of resentment and manipulation bubbling to the surface, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was the confrontation we'd been hurtling towards for years, the moment of truth that would define our futures. Enough, I said quietly, but with enough force to silence them both. They turned to me, as if suddenly remembering I was there. Alara, you're not welcome here. Not after everything you've done to sabotage this place, to sabotage me. Alara's mouth opened and closed, but for once, she seemed at a loss for words. And Gideon, I continued, meeting his gaze. I appreciate your apology, and I'm proud of you for standing up to your mother. But it doesn't erase the years of hurt and neglect. His face fell, but he nodded in understanding. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I want a chance to make things right, to support you the way I should have all along. I took a deep breath, weighing my words carefully. I can't promise anything, Gideon, but I'm willing to try, on my terms. As Alara stormed out, muttering threats and curses, Gideon and I shared a look of cautious hope. The air felt lighter somehow, as if a poisonous fog had finally lifted. Outside the office, the sounds of laughter and conversation reminded me of the new life I'd built, the community I'd fostered. Whatever happened with Gideon, whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. For the first time in years, the future felt wide open, full of possibility. And I was ready to embrace it on my own terms. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with Alara, and the community center had blossomed beyond my wildest dreams. The once empty rooms now buzzed with activity, art classes, book clubs, and lively discussions filling every corner of the old Victorian. As I walked through the garden, where residents tended to raised beds bursting with vegetables and flowers, I caught sight of Mrs. Beatrice leading a Tai Chi class on the lawn. Her movements were slow but graceful, a far cry from the frail woman I'd first met. Looking good, Mrs. B. I called out, earning a wink and a wave from the spirited octogenarian. All thanks to you, dear, she replied, not missing a beat in her routine. This place has given us all a new lease on life. I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. This was my father's legacy, realized in ways I never could have imagined. As I made my way back inside, I spotted Gideon chatting with a group of veterans in the common room. Over the past months, he'd become a regular volunteer, slowly rebuilding trust and finding his own place in this community we'd created. Our relationship was different now, no longer husband and wife, but partners in a shared vision. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest in a way it had never been before.
My.
Emmett's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He jogged up, a mischievous glint in his eye. You'll never guess who just called.
Who?
The mayor's office. They want to use our center as a model for a citywide program. They're talking about funding, expansion, the works. I gasped, my mind reeling with the possibilities. Emmett, that's incredible. We could help so many more people, create a real change in the community. He grinned, pulling me into a tight hug. We already have, Mal. You already have. As we broke apart, I caught the softness in his gaze, the unspoken something that had been growing between us. It was new and fragile, but filled with promise, much like the life I'd built for myself. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, I found myself alone in my father's old study. The room had become my sanctuary, a place to reflect and recharge. I ran my fingers along the spines of his books, pausing at a worn copy of his favorite poem. As I pulled it from the shelf, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. With trembling hands, I unfolded it, recognizing my father's handwriting immediately. My dearest Mallory, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to yourself. I always knew you had the strength to break free from the chains that bound you, whether they were of your own making or placed upon you by others. This house, this legacy, was never meant to be a burden. It was a gift, a chance for you to discover your own power and purpose. I see now that you've done just that, in ways more beautiful than I could have imagined. Remember, my darling girl, that true strength lies not in standing alone, but in lifting others up alongside you. You've created a community, a family bound not by blood, but by shared dreams and compassion. I am so proud of you, Mallory. Not for what you've built, but for who you've become. All my love, Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter to my chest. In that moment, I felt my father's presence more strongly than I had since his passing. A soft knock at the door pulled me back to the present. Emmett stood in the doorway, concern etched on his face. Everything okay? I nodded, wiping my eyes and managing a watery smile. Better than okay. I finally understand what all of this was meant to be. As I shared the letter with Emmett, his arm wrapped comfortingly around my shoulders, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The journey had been long and often painful, but it had led me exactly where I needed to be. Outside, the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted up from the garden, where residents and volunteers were gathering for the weekly community dinner. My community. My family. Shall we? Emmett asked, offering his hand. I took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine. Let's go home, I said, realizing that for the first time in my life, I truly understood what that word meant. As we walked downstairs to join the others, I carried with me the weight of my father's approval, the lightness of my newfound freedom, and the strength of the bonds I'd forged. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them, not as the woman I once was, but as the woman I'd become. A woman who had learned to stand on her own, to lift others up, and to create a legacy of love and compassion that would ripple out far beyond the walls of this old Victorian house. This was my new dawn, and it was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined.